We're here on the Fireside chat with Abi Dorhosti.
Dorhosti.
Hello, all.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And our topic is healing and leadership from survival to service. And so this was a something that emerged in a conversation actually with Abi as she's been doing her work. And the question surrounding all of this is really what happens to leadership when the mission ends, but its imprint remains. So we also discussed now informally that a lot of people feel like maybe they left themselves behind in maybe not like a military mission per se, but in some sort of activity, first responders I'm thinking of, or even maybe nurses in certain cases, and so there is a lot of that. I want to say it's the trauma really out there where people who are absolutely in a position to engage with leadership, to be amazing leaders, maybe in their own self-reflection feel that they can't, or there's something there that, stops them. So it's experiences of crisis, moral complexity, loss, prolonged vigilance, then shape not only mental health, but identity and decision-making. And the way the leadership is embodied long after either the uniform comes off or that identity is changed. So we're bringing this into the conversation, moving beyond a clinical performance-based model, really looking at meaning-making, whole person integration as an essential foundation for sustainable leadership. So that is very close to our mission here at Sophia University in general, transpersonal psychology as well, and whole person psychology. And with that being said, I would like to introduce Abi. She's a 25-year United States Air Force veteran. She is a moral injury and post-traumatic growth researcher and a transpersonal practitioner dedicated to reimagining healing and leadership for those who have served. She's currently a PhD student in transpersonal psychology and focuses her work on the psychological, moral, and existential dimensions of trauma, identity, and meaning-making in veterans and frontline professionals. Following her military career, Abi transitioned into a new vocation centered on whole person healing, combining this research, coaching, mindfulness practices, embodied approaches, very somatically orientated to support individuals navigating the aftermath of service and high stakes leadership. Her work emphasizes not only recovery from trauma, but also the cultivation of purpose, integrity, and alignment in body, mind, and spirit. So Abi's approach reframes moral injury not simply as a psychological distress, but a profound disruption of meaning and belonging, an invitation to transform wounds into wisdom, responsibility, renewed service. Through coaching, research, workshops, and community building initiatives, she supports veterans, first responders, and leaders in translating experiences of crisis and responsibility into pathways of post-traumatic growth, and we talked about that in the beginning as well, and ethical leadership. So at the intersection of this lived experience and transpersonal inquiry, Abi's work challenges these conventional narratives of resilience and leadership. She invites a deeper conversation, one in which healing is not peripheral to leadership, but foundational to it, and where service evolves from survival towards conscious and purpose-driven contribution. Mm-hmm. So welcome, Abi. And then my name is Dr. Doroté Weyers-Lucci, and I'm the chair of the DBA, and so it's business and transpersonal leadership here at Sophia University. I'm also the chair of the Global Mental Health Conference, and in both those capacities, I wanted to engage in this conversation with Abi about a topic that is, I think, crucial at this point in time. And so we had a few questions that we prepared, but just kind of jumping in. So where was the moment that you said, I want to embark on this new path? And of course, we're going to talk about moral injury because we have to, and what it means, because it's not, I think, evident to everybody what moral injury is. So at what moment in time did you go like, this is it? Like, I know this is it's a solution. It's where I want to be or where I want to go. Yeah, tell us more.
The short answer is there wasn't a moment. There still hasn't been a moment. It's been an evolution. In some ways, I still don't know what I'm doing because it's still evolving. It's like its own energy. In 2019, I kind of embarked on this shift from military, very rational, logical, chronos time world that I was living in, partly due to kind of a little bit of an existential break of my own, of realizing that the job that I had been asked to do, and which I did well, because it's what we do, was really not aligned with what I felt was making the world, much less the United States, safer. And I started to experience a lot of cognitive dissonance. And the beauty of that is the difficulty I experienced led me to the point at which I realized I needed help. And so I started working with a therapist. I was assigned to the State Department in Washington, D.C. I was working with the National Security Council staff, working on policy for arms transfers and arms transfer policy to the Middle East and Africa in particular. And I was really struggling with, is this actually making the world a safer, more loving place or not? And so I finally found a therapist. So I would drive across the river over to the Pentagon once a week and sit with my therapist, and recognized during that experience that it wasn't just cognitive dissonance at work that I needed to work on. There was so much I had buried for so long because I was fine. My career was going wonderfully. Obviously, everything is good, right? I'm fine. And starting to recognize how much I had really pushed down. And so it opened up space to start to explore where I had maybe sacrificed my own beliefs or closed down my voice in order to go along, get along, etc. The patterns that those had created. And also, it was beginning that exploration of my own identity outside of the identity I'd been assigned within the military. And led to me being able to change jobs over to the Counterterrorism Bureau, where I felt much more aligned in the work that I was doing. And that related much more to my previous experience, where much of my career was in the joint world, the interagency world. So I worked with all the services, with the special operations community, the intelligence community, just kind of across, and obviously State Department, the diplomatic community. And I was able to get permission to take 3 weeks of vacation leave at one time. And I took myself to Bali. And it was the first time possibly in my life that I actually experienced a regulated nervous system. And that took about a week of hardly speaking to anyone other than say, please, thank you, and order food. But I wasn't engaging in conversations. I was just being, possibly for the first time of my life, without, I have to get this done. Oh, what's this? What do people need of me? And that it's almost like we put ourselves into this super upregulated nervous system 24/7 because it's important. We're saving lives. And that's true on the one hand, and we sometimes forget how to just be human. Mm. And so that experience towards the end of it, I worked with a phenomenal coach and therapist. Her name is Veronique. 5 hours a day, one-on-one for 7 days straight. It was my first experience of dipping into this other world of inner child work, ecstatic dance, ceremony, touching into some shamanic practices. And it really opened up possibilities for me. I did my undergrad at the Air Force Academy in behavioral science. And I kind of went, oh, I don't want to go get a PhD and go back to school and become a psychologist, although that had at one point been my dream. But I could become a coach and still work with people. So that was the initial spark of moving into these healing practices. And so when I went back to the State Department, I came back kind of as a whole new person. And I chose that I wanted to lead with love, which is not something you hear a lot in the military necessarily, although there are other leaders that are practicing this, I know for a fact. And I had so much less attachment to the things that don't really matter in the end. I didn't as easily let myself be told something's a crisis because some leader needs some paper really, really fast when lives aren't actually at stake. And so I started moving into a more relational way of being and being connected to my body and connected to my heart, and also looking with perspective at what is being asked of me. Then COVID happened. And that gave me time and space to really integrate a lot of what I had learned during that experience in Bali that I may not have been otherwise afforded. And as absolutely devastating as COVID was for so many, for me, it really became a blessing. My needs were met, very grateful for that, very privileged to have been in a place where my paycheck didn't change. I couldn't really go to work much. And so I had a lot of time and space, spent a lot of time on my bicycle, a lot of time writing, which I hadn't done in years, like not writing a paper for a purpose, but
Reflection.
Poetry, prose, all my feeling. I started working with another coach, Jen Mons, who was a fellow Service Academy graduate, and just really starting to explore, like, who am I? What do I really want? Outside of the uniform, I was coming up, I was at that point 2 years away from retirement, a year and a half. And then I ended up being invited to apply for another job, which would mean delaying my retirement. But also we were just coming out of COVID. So that safety of staying in the military just a little longer felt good. And so I accepted it. And I went into my command role again. I was going to lead with love. It's kind of an experiment.
So you'd already, like, you felt like you'd already gone through a transformation at that point in time. So it's a little bit as if you were looking to connect back into your world, per se, with, like, not really, wait, I'm waiting to hear what's next, but it's like like I want to go back. Yes, the safety of that. And what happened?
I brought guided meditation to my very conservative unit. I brought in a program that another wonderful retired combat veteran had put together that is called Warrior's Edge, and was designed for the military. And she's working with the coach of the Seattle Seahawks.
Oh, yes.
And she developed this program, and it was the goal was to look at our emotions, our mind, as they need to be exercised.
Just as a side note for everyone, the coach of the Seattle Seahawks is an expert in mindfulness and leads that whole team with mindfulness practices and self-awareness practices that then allow that team to exceed and excel expectations. Anyways, yes.
Yes. So it's such a beautiful bridge program that's taking football, taking the military, and dipping in and bridging between that logical, rational framework and touching into the aspects that are more of an art, an embodiment, and a being with, instead of continuous action and goal-oriented framework. And so I brought that into my unit, convinced them to purchase it for the military folks in my unit. And after I did one guided meditation. It was for the entire organization. So not just mine, but everyone else in the organization. And I remember one of my guys walked up to me and that was pretty weird, ma'am, but that was nice. I feel really relaxed. And it was just interesting seeing for those, this was completely new and outside of their frame of reference. My commander didn't always love me,
Right.
because I was definitely not a yes woman. But I think, I'm sure she respected me, and ultimately my unit won the logistics team of the year and logistics and the higher organization, logistics organization of the year for the entire intelligence community. So like we were competing against all those 3-letter agencies that you've heard of. And
Beautiful.
yeah.
So it's like, I mean, pragmatically speaking, so again, like bringing in certain tools and the cultivation of certain skills, you know, that might feel bizarre at first if you're not coming, well, yeah, logical, rational, physical world, where maybe the connection is not so obvious, and yet the performance then speaks for itself. So you have that experience, and then you're like, oh, this is awesome.
Exactly. It was kind of, this works. Leading with love works. Approaching leadership as a relational construct, not as in a hierarchical, I tell you what to do because I'm the boss construct. That was kind of the initial shift. And so as I retired, the military has an amazing program called Skill Bridge, where your last 6 months of still being paid as an active duty military member, before separation or retirement, you're able to go out and be in an internship with somewhere in the non-military community as a bridge, skill bridge, so that folks that are leaving the military have an entrance into being successful in the civilian world. It's necessary but insufficient, I would say. We could get into concepts of rights of return later on. But for me, this is a beautiful experience. I ended up working as the wellness director for a friend's company, while also simultaneously, as part of the program, finishing or completing, starting my certification in health and wellness coaching through Georgetown University. And then during this time frame, I also did the 3 courses to become a Reiki master across a few months. And so now I'm getting into energy work. And so we're getting really over to the woo-woo, but still I've never left also looking at the pragmatic, practical application of that was evidenced in that organization where we won the awards by practicing this whole new relational form of leadership.
Yeah, which was really important. So, yeah, and I mean, what you're addressing is it really goes into the direction of this whole person element. You know, how do you bring the people in fully, into this engagement with your leadership? And if you studied behavioral psychology before, how has your perspective of that changed? That field, because I find it a fascinating field because we underestimate it. I find a lot that's a part of psychology that's underestimated. And working with whole person psychology, then we really use a lot of behavioral. So how would you speak to that, and what is your relationship to that now? I guess for people who are not involved also in the whole person psychology.
Yeah, so much of psychology still wants to be very logically scientific. And so it's, how do you narrow down to a single variable so that we can test something? This is true in these circumstances, not true in the others. The difficulty with that is, as humans, we are extraordinarily complex. I personally don't believe it's possible to really create an independent variable kind of situation because there's so many factors we don't know. No 2 humans have had the same experience. And 2 people can have a very similar experience. Speaking of PTSD and moral injury, you can have a group of people that are involved in the same event. Some of them are fine. Some of them struggle and then are able to shift quickly. And some might really get stuck in a loop of reliving what happened and really have difficulty in being able to let that experience go. We are so unique as humans. And so looking at psychology less as a narrowing down the independent variables, but yes, it's the whole person. And how can we recognize that, yes, it's a science, but it's also an art.
Right.
And to balance both of those and have the relationality and the objective, but also the subjective. Am I looking at you as an object where I'm behavioral psychology, I'm trying to create a particular behavior or change a behavior in a manipulative way, or am I engaging with you as a human and listening and relating and exploring and really trusting you in so many ways to know what the answer is for you, and I'm just here to help bring that out. And so it's just when it comes to leadership, it's the same thing to me. Is the military teaches a very hierarchical model, which doesn't mean that's always how it is in practice.
Right.
So much is also based on relationships and trust, and all of that is so true too. And the model is very hierarchical because I have this rank.
How do I relate to you as, having a different rank, or, where is your identity, in that particular,
And it's
military, but it's always, I would say, it's not just in the military where you're, these people, constructs in that way. So relating back to a person from a whole person perspective, and looking at, behavioral, that also changes the patterns, that allows people to maybe break patterns that, they used to be in. And, you talk about the reliving certain things and not being able to come out of that loop so easily, unless you have help or somebody to mirror something. And then we're going into the realm of therapy, but which is certainly a part of this. But really this idea of being a reborn leader in a way, right? So you are, and you are, you come with a different perspective now in that particular way of relating to people. Now, I would love you to say something, because I know, like, moral injury, right? It sounds like such an abstract term, but it really is not. Can you say something about that? And what was it that, inspired you to go into that particular direction?
So let me go back for a moment first and then come to that.
Yeah.
You spoke of the identity shifts, and
Right.
that is where, so these hierarchical organizations within the military and elsewhere, when you leave that organization, sometimes it's difficult to figure out how one relates when it's no longer simple. When you're working in a context where it's not your title or your rank from which you derive authority. And so it can create expectations, it can create frustrations. It can also, again, when one leaves the military and there's no deprogramming to match the programming that, again, is necessary, right? We have these hierarchies for a reason. It's fog of war, etc. I in no way, shape, or form am I saying that that's wrong. However, when you lose those frameworks,
it's the structure, right? So like, it's almost like you're given a compass to function in a certain structure. And I think that is probably the same thing, like for first responders or anybody that's at the front, or front line, anything, right? So there's a certain structure. Why? Because it's like you have to be able to function quickly without necessarily thinking at that moment in time. It almost has to be an innate reaction that you have to be attuned to that. And like, it feels like, yes, that's jarring, right? So all of a sudden, there's none of that.
You don't have the identity anymore. And because we're talking about rules of high stakes service, whether someone is a firefighter or an emergency medical technician or a military member, it really is your identity, because what you're doing often impacts life and death. Even if you are a person who has never deployed, who's working in the safety of a base, you making a mistake could have that second and third order effect of a mission not being accomplished, of lives being impacted. And so part of that programming and training is to recognize that no matter how small you might sometimes think your job is, it is part of a an impactful puzzle that ultimately is about lives. And so you carry this with pride, and it is your identity. And when things shift and you don't have that anymore, and maybe you started rather young, and it's this whole new experience you're going through of who am I when I don't have the uniform, when I don't have the rank, when I don't have the safety of these structures. And so that can create just, it can be very,
trauma.
yeah, yeah. And it's just difficulty and not necessarily, you know, all of a sudden you don't have the structure, the framework to go to either. And there's still some stigma often about seeking help, which is unfortunate. And I think all of these organizations and services are trying to shift that. And yet,
I love you addressing.
yes.
And there's an interesting study with also work done with the military with virtual reality. And the results there were that people preferred to interact with virtual reality therapists versus a real therapist because they were able to say everything. And so, when I heard that, it's Skip Rizzo, who is, I believe, USC, and that's part of one of his projects. Yeah, it just broke my heart too, because that means, that whatever you're carrying is so heavy that you don't even want to tell another human.
And this really leads into the moral injury piece. And so I think everyone is probably familiar with the term PTSD. And I'm very grateful for PTSD being recognized. Really post-Vietnam War is when it started to come into the vocabulary. Originally shell shock. It's always existed, but this was the new name and framework we had it. And so post-traumatic stress disorder, a disorder of when someone is unable to function in the way they need to due to an inability to resolve a stressful trauma. It's my belief, and this is a strong area of research for me, that a lot of what we call PTSD is actually moral injury. So the way PTSD is codified in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Health is it's fear-based, and it has to be your life was at risk, or someone you care about, their life was at risk. And so it's afraid for the life. It's a fear-based response. Very reasonable is the other thing. And looking at this is it makes perfect sense that this happens at times. So it's not that there's something wrong with the reaction, but when one is able to metabolize and integrate and move through, and they're stuck in this trauma response, that's when it becomes a disorder, because it's impacting your ability to live a healthy, functional life the way you would want to. Unfortunately, our medical system also doesn't usually intervene until it's to that point. And so I'm a huge proponent that there be earlier on interventions that you don't have to hit the disorder point so we can preclude reaching disorder. However, there's another expression, and they can comorbid is the formal term, but sometimes you can absolutely have both, where it's shame-based. And so it's internally directed. And it's, this was coined by Brett Litz in 2009, I believe. But it's when you either committed an act contrary to your own moral compass, or you failed to act to prevent something, or it can be related to betrayal. And an institution that you thought was standing for right suddenly betrays you. And so it's this internally directed shame, self-recrimination. And I believe one can lead to the other at times. Somebody comes back with PTSD and they're not able to show up as a spouse or as a parent the way they think they should. They can't go to the amusement park with their family because they can't, their nervous system isn't able to process the noise, the crowds, etc. And so they start feeling like, okay, I'm failing. I'm failing as a spouse. I'm failing as a parent. I'm failing as a colleague at work. I can't show up the way I used to. So then it becomes internally directed. And it's difficult because Brene Brown has described this very well, of guilt is I did something bad, shame is I am bad. And when somebody starts to believe that there's something wrong with them, that they're failing, that they're broken, that's such a difficult wound to shift from. And it's something that purely cognitive, talk-based, you can't convince someone that they really are worthy of love.
No.
It has to be an experience. It
That's
needs to be
correct.
somatic, emotional, relational. And so one is Brene Brown, again, did some beautiful work on this, but if you see me in my shame and you witness me and you love me with that, not despite it even, that you can see me in my wholeness and still feel that I'm worthy of love, and I can see that. I can expose my deepest shames and still be loved. That's a way to start shifting the patterns.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because if you think about it, it's a parental role. Technically speaking,
Going to
right?
the roots.
That if you go to the roots of it and the experience of being fully accepted as you are. So it's almost like an element of, yeah, definitely going through a really dark period with that potentially, and then being allowed, or, there's a hand that comes in, says, you're okay, I see you, you're okay. And maybe, for some people, like going back to that Skip Rizzo study, for some people it is VR, that's a start. I mean, you got to start somewhere. So if that is like a door that opens up, and then people start talking about something that they're so ashamed about, then, just the practice of it, and then maybe next tell like a real therapist. And also make sure that that person, is like grounded, because that's the other part of it too, right?
Yes.
I mean,
And
it has to be, it has to be authentic,
yes.
and peers. And that's okay. So you found that peers, that's a real healing experience.
Absolutely.
To be accepted by peers.
This is something that came out of Vietnam. They would call them rap sessions. And there was generally a therapist that was there, but it was sitting in a circle of others who had experienced something similar to what you had experienced, and feeling safer and feeling like there's someone who would actually understand. Because absolutely, you spoke about the not even wanting to share something so heavy with a therapist. There's a piece sometimes, quite frankly, where it's caretaking.
Yep.
If I've experienced the horrors of war, and I don't think you have, and you're my therapist, I'm now trying to protect you sometimes. And so being able to sit with a peer where someone can read between the lines of what's being said and can have that frame of reference, sometimes can make it feel safer to begin to share. And so that's what I think of when I think of relational leadership, and this moving from the hierarchical military model into a different model of leadership, where it's not about a hierarchy, it's relational, it's influencing, and really it begins with self-leadership. And so this is the piece of moving from the wounds to the wisdom. Someone who has never experienced anything traumatic in their life, which I think is very, very rare. And if you're going, oh yeah, I've never had anything traumatic, I would probably argue with you. I mean, childhood, the patterns that are created when we think that we have to earn love, all of this, right? And so it's beginning to first have the self-leadership to look within and recognize that we all have experienced traumas. There's little t traumas and big T traumas. I'm not saying it's all the same, and yet it's all relative. How I respond to what I've experienced is personal to me, and I don't need to compare it to what you've experienced. And so being in a space where I can look at within and say, I have preferences, I have biases, I have things that are very uncomfortable for me because they relate back to something I've experienced before. And I can own that, and I can sit with that complexity. And I don't have to heal everything, because I don't really think healing is not an objective, it's a process. And it's a process that I personally believe I'll be going through for the rest of my life. And it's beautiful. But those traumas and those experiences are what create the strength. They talk about how the scar tissue is stronger than the original tissue. And it's being able to integrate and metabolize and pull the wisdom from that, and to be able to lead from from an embodied place of this is who I am, and not needing to, it doesn't even mean that it has to be explained or told, but it's just being able to hold all of my complexity and sit with the complexity of others and recognize that because something worked for me doesn't mean it works for everyone else. It's true for me, it does not mean it's the same for everyone. So to be in that space of complexity where it's a relationship, it's a conversation, it's not, I think this, therefore you should do this. And it's really deeply recognizing and honoring the sovereignty of everyone.
Mm-mm. So it also reminds me, you speaking about it like this, that, that's probably a continuum, that one.
Absolutely.
So that, it's not like either you have experienced or are experiencing moral injury and then not.
Mhm. And this is one, again, I wish I could remember the name of it to cite it, but there was a recent study that I looked at the graph, the chart that they put together was like, duh, it made so much sense. And I needed them to do the work to identify this, but it talked about, it's like a quadrant scale and it's duration and intensity. And so a traumatic event happens, you might have very high duration response to it, or sorry, very high intensity, but the duration isn't so long. You experience something very traumatic, but you have the time and space and support, honoring the privilege of even having that necessarily, and you can process it and you can move through it. And so now you have some wisdom to bring from that. It could be long duration, low intensity, and impacting your quality of life, but
Right.
not, you're still able to show up and function. And so that would be an injury, right? It's impacted you, but you can still do what you need to do.
Yeah.
And if it's high intensity and long duration, that's when you get to where it's a disorder. You're not able to function in the way you need to at all. And this
Then that's
continuing.
And that's a continuum too. Then
Yes.
when it is a disorder.
Yes.
So then you move into the clinical realm with that. So one thing that strikes me too about this, if you're dealing with this and as a leader, you can see others who may be experiencing this,
Mhm.
moral injury wherever on the continuum.
Mhm.
And so that allows you to also inspire and allow them to access their potential
Yes.
for really what it is, because there's every human, and we've talked about this as well, there's purpose and there is beautiful skills and there is personal development and of course there is professional skills and all of that, but there's always something that more that can emerge.
Yes.
That can be worked with so that really the quality of life increases for everybody.
Mhm.
For that person, for you, if you're in a work team, if they're your friend, everything sort of starts growing in that. So how would you, having had all of these experiences and really having grown through it all, how would you give, maybe a piece of advice is the wrong word, but just to say like, hey, if you have somebody like this on your team,
Mhm.
where you can see it,
Mhm.
like there's something there where they just cannot go beyond this shame or the difficulty, what would you say? What would you tell them? Like, this is a great way of being with this.
So different depending on the context. If I'm outside of any
Right.
sort of therapeutic context, then
Let's take it outside of the therapeutic context. Yeah.
So it's if you're recognizing someone is just down on themselves all the time. To me, there's not a specific advice that I could give because it's different for everyone. But one thing that could be done is like starting to help shift those patterns, like help someone recognize their wins and celebrate that. Because part of this is the it's the reprogramming, right? It's those grooves we get into, and we have the bias often to look for the negative, look for what went wrong every time,
Yes.
right? You get 98 positive comments.
Yeah.
You're focused on the 2 that were not positive. And so it's helping someone remember to like, hey, can you witness and see and feel that that was awesome and your contribution was really important to the success. And the other piece is just, I mean, please, let's encourage people to reach out for help when they need it. If we're outside of therapeutic context, encourage someone to seek help, whether it's with a therapist or a coach, or there's a peer group that they can join, whatever feels right for them. And that comes back to the relational leadership. It's not that I'm in a position over you, therefore I can tell you what you need or transmit the information you need. It's instead that coming to this leadership space from a place of curiosity of what feels right to you. Are you open to exploring this with me? I want to see you succeed. I want to see you live a life that feels good to you. Can we explore what might be a good way that you would want to seek support, where you would feel comfortable seeking support in this way? And so always with that energy of curiosity and just exploring. And if the answer is no and the person is not open to this, that's okay too.
Right.
And letting it go and trusting, and perhaps they'll come back around and come to you later because you were willing to let them be in their sovereignty. And so that's a way of building trust as well.
Yeah, I think that maybe that is an encouragement for them to reclaim themselves, right? Because that's where sovereignty lies. Are there any questions by any chance, even
I think
from you
we might
guys here?
have one.
Yeah, over there. Do you want to? I think you had to leave,
Oh,
and
yes.
he was saying thank you, but I can't. I don't know if you want to click on it or click on that one. There we go.
All right. Yeah, if anyone does have
Oh,
questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We have it up now.
yeah. How about from you guys here? Do you have any questions around this? Because it really also relates to all the things that I've been talking about.
Really rich conversation. Yes.
Yeah, I know, because it's also, the truth is, this is a difficult conversation, one way or the other, right? So it might be challenging if you're in a professional capacity and you have somebody, working with you or under you or even above you, where you notice that there is this tendency in this direction, and it's like, yes, and having more information about what's needed, from the perspective of this moral injury, I think is important, because if you don't know about it, you can't ever, speak to it or think about it or encourage, that person to blossom in their potential and go beyond that and heal it.
And that's another, again, speaking from a leadership perspective inside an organization or outside of the mental health spaces, when someone is in a trauma response, if someone's in these difficult spaces, sometimes it's hard to figure out what's even available. And so another wonderful way to support someone would be to educate yourself. If you're coming from a regulated space, if you're in a leadership position, what resources are available based on if somebody's a veteran, if somebody's a former first responder. And then you can just suggest resources and say, hey, here's some, the VFW, the American Legion, there's an organization, First Responders Behavioral Health Institute, that does a lot of online courses in mindfulness and understanding moral injury for the first responder community. There are resources out there, and it's a lot easier to figure out what they are when you're not already in an I need help space. And then last, I would love to briefly also mention that at Sophia University, we're developing a veteran leadership concentration within our Master of Arts in Transpersonal Psychology. And it's really designed not to create a therapist that's going to diagnose and treat, but to create peer leaders from this relational leadership perspective, during which we'll be looking at our own wounds, using storytelling, using compassionate witnessing, to look at how it feels to really be seen in our story, in our wholeness, moving into looking at archetypes and looking at the hero's journey, moving through, and then a course on grief. How do we talk about suicide? How do we talk about loss in a way that's invitational and not making it something wrong? And this is really setting up veterans to be able to do the work to translate their own wounds and experiences into being a source of healing for their communities, first responders, etc.
Right. So, it's a yes and. Right? In the sense that, all the things that you're pointing to as well, is, yes, there's skill development. So yes, to go in that direction, you can dive deeper and definitely, and I want to almost say everything that we're offering. And then specifically that if, you are veteran first responder and you want to work with the material in a specific way, and also the field of whole person psychology is really geared towards developing the skills. So then you have, the clinical component, which is counseling, as well as the transpersonal psychology component at a master's level, or you do more leadership work from, the Doctor of Business Administration and Leadership. And, depending on where you are, maybe there's some people who are also wanting to do like an MBA. It's just, that's that skill development, but also for people who've never heard about this. And I think, yes, the veteran community for sure, this is, I think, essential knowledge. So part of this is you really speaking to this moral injury and speaking to your research, because it is such, I think it's a new term. So can you say something I saw the other day where you were talking or writing about the DSM, or that it's just being recognized, something about it? I don't know what I saw. Like, tell me more about it.
So moral injury was very recently codified into the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Health, but it's a V code or Z code in the international ICD stand for.
Oh, that's yes. It's the clinical diagnosis manual that is used in Europe and so on. Yes.
Yeah. And so moral injury has been formally recognized. And
is it in the DSM too?
Yes, but it is not a standalone diagnosis. So essentially you can be diagnosed with, for example, PTSD, and you can have a code of moral injury attached to that. And so it can't be diagnosed standalone. And personally, I think it does need to be a standalone diagnosis.
Interesting.
Because unfortunately, PTSD doesn't capture, for example, think of a UAV operator, a drone operator, who goes to work day in and day out and witnesses death, destruction, terrible acts. Maybe the person that is, pushing the button to cause loss of life.
Yes.
Because their lives were not personally at risk, they often don't qualify for a PTSD diagnosis. And yet they're dealing with significant moral injury for some of them. Speaking of people that I know personally and hearing their stories. There so many circumstances, situations where it doesn't fit the definition of PTSD, but it is moral injury. And it is recognized by the Veterans Administration. It is recognized in the world. However, without that diagnostic code, it can't be diagnosed to where insurance is paying for treatment. And so we need more research on what are the therapies that are most likely to support healing and transmuting these wounds of moral injury into post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
How do we,
No, I think what strikes me is there's many dimensions to this, right? So the one dimension is really like a therapeutic dimension, a clinical dimension. It is a conversation around, what do we, if you're a practitioner, what do we have to do as practitioners to support this type of I don't like the word label, and I don't like labels, but, you know, in a way it's helpful because then, you know, somebody can lean into what's going on and more, I want to say awareness around this is important. And then also, you know, hiring more veterans or hiring more people who have had, you know, these like firefighters you mentioned as well. I mean, that's also, you know, if somebody can't go back to firefighting for whatever reason, and you're hiring somebody like that to also have a certain sensitivity to, okay, you know, this is what works really well for them, this is what doesn't. So how would you go about creating, you know, an environment that, you know, supports this type of moral injury? Yes, from a therapeutic perspective, absolutely. You know, there's a lot of work to be done, and, you know, thank you for your research on that, because I think that is very, very helpful. But also, you know, just how can we support our, you know, leaders that are maybe wounded leaders? You know, we have the wounded healers, so we have the wounded leaders, and how can we support them in you know, coming to, or, you know, coming back to themselves? What do you think?
There's been a difficulty with kind of the stigma sometimes around veterans and those coming from roles in which there was trauma. I think it's important not to create a stigma. So to me, the question is, how do we create this kind of environment for everyone?
That's
And
right.
so we're not just looking at, oh, this person is a veteran, this person's a former firefighter, they might be traumatized, I need to be extra careful. It's like, no, everyone, whether it's due to violence as a child, whether it's due to the impacts of racism and what someone goes through, going through life as not the dominant culture. All of this creates preferences, biases, sensitivities, what makes us unique as humans. And so how do we as leaders create an environment where someone can actually show up as their whole authentic self, where someone doesn't have to fit into a box?
So what do you think? Like, I mean, you know, I absolutely, I like trade. So allowing for, you know, how would you say, you know, allowing for people not to be perfect. I think that's what we're talking about here. Like, how would you do that in a work environment?
So this would be several more hours of conversation to really get into. I can touch on some nuances.
Nuances.
Yeah. So first of all, again, it comes back to the self-leadership.
Right.
Also being willing to show up as, even if you're the president, the CEO, none of us is perfect. None of us is always on. And so being willing to be a little bit messy and to be authentic yourself and not feeling like you always have to put on the mask. And so, and allowing your people to do that too. And so it's demonstrating and modeling that it's okay to be human. And a very cool technique, a dear friend of mine, Rashad Howard, at the company when I first was his wellness director as an intern, and then my company was hired on by his company to continue working with his people, is he had what he called an ego check at the beginning of his meetings. And it was just, everyone was invited to be like, here's what's going on in my life right now. So that they could speak it and then set it to the side and be as present as they could be in that. And it might be, and like we did this today when we showed up, or yesterday, and I hadn't gotten much sleep. I traveled for 2 days to get here from where I now live in Costa Rica. And so I showed up with, I'm really tired. I haven't had enough sleep. I'm going to do my best to show up. But I'm not pretending anything. This is me, this is real in the moment. So creating an environment where it's okay to say, hey, you know, my kid kept me up all night, or someone's sick, or someone I love has a health situation they're suffering right now. And so I'm not able to be fully present. Part of me is going to be distracted by this situation, and saying, okay, that's okay, we're here for you. And the other piece of this is, I'm a huge fan of, please seek therapy. Therapy is wonderful, whether there's something wrong or whether it's simply maintenance. However, it's creating these middle spaces. We don't have enough therapists to meet the need necessarily. However, working with a coach, working with a peer, finding someone where maybe you make the agreement that you're just going to sit with each other and listen to each other's stories once a week or whatever it takes. But creating those spaces where you can show up messy and be held in that. And looking if you can create those spaces.
Yeah, and I keep thinking, I think that there is a diamond here in the sense of the, wounded leader. Because essentially, if that, if anybody's listening that where that's the case, really to give this as a gift and to say, the contribution you can make with that to others is huge.
Yes.
And I think from the wounded perspective, there's an aspect where people don't realize that because they're stuck in that place. And so that becomes their reality, right? And it's hard to get out of, and that is like, we talked about, the default mode network and your narrative in your head and not being able to come out of it. And a lot of the things that we teach here at Sophia are around how to come out of that. In no matter where, in what place you are, the university. So, in whichever program, that's a part of it. But just to realize, there's a gift here that, as you grow out of that space, you're incredibly inspiring to others, just like you. I mean, you are incredibly inspiring to others because of that, right? And it's so important. And that piece is so precious. And I think that alone, that understanding, yes, I can come out of it. Yes, I can. There's a purpose here in all the crap that happened. And for whatever reason you got into that situation, like no judgment. Life happens. You get caught up in all sorts of things and you ended up in that situation, that path. And we have others working at Sophia who have had, who've gotten blown up in war and so on. And so just to see them being able to contribute from that place is really inspiring to other people too. Like to your point, you don't have to have been in the same situation. It's not like a weird label. It is a beautiful. And I know it because it doesn't feel that way, but I want to say really the wounded leader is a thing. And yeah.
And the wounded leader may be a wounded healer.
That's right.
Yes.
So that can come on top of it, right? Like,
Yes,
I mean,
because
certainly is your case, but but maybe for others it isn't. And maybe they want to learn about, how to. I'm just saying in general, take up the, it's not a challenge, but the gift of being able to find meaning. And I think we talked about that as well. Find the meaning.
And the reason I mentioned the wounded leader can be the wounded healer is if you are leading relationally, if you are creating organizations, companies, whatever it is, a peer circle where others are able to show up in their wholeness, they're able to show up authentically. You are creating spaces of healing. That is healing. And so whether being a healer is something one identifies with or not, by showing up in your authenticity and being a human who's putting a little bit more love and care into the world, that is healing. And that's something we can all do. We all have spaces where we can be that kind of relational leader. We can model, we can demonstrate more kindness, more compassion directed towards self and others.
And I was going to say, and you started off with self-leadership, and we start off with self-leadership in the MBA, by the way. And so, yes, very, very important factor. Okay. we're going to like start wrapping up, I think, if you're okay with it.
Absolutely.
Anything else that comes to your mind? Like at this moment in time, you have Abby on that channel, so you might want to ask her something in relation to her work, or what it's like to lead at work, or from a therapeutic perspective. What would you do if somebody shows up and they have questions around that, like
The same if anyone on video wants to
Yeah.
come off mic or put something in the chat, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, don't be shy, please. And you can just type it in. Otherwise, I just want to wrap up, because I went through a lot of the questions that were there and that we had previously. So, I think we covered pretty much everything. If there was one more thing that you would add, what would it be?
The inner and the outer, just an invitation to everyone to consider what's one way that you could offer a little bit more compassion or kindness to yourself. And then what's one way that you might be able to offer that in your actions.
So I have one more here though. What gives you hope about the future of leadership and healing? Because we want to keep this balanced, right?
So I'm going to go from the dark to the light here.
Yes, please.
I think we have all witnessed those that are acting out of their traumas. Those who are leading from a space of protection and
Yes.
frustration and opposition. And it's uncomfortable, and it leads to some recent events that are extraordinarily unfortunate of people acting from their traumas, which doesn't mean that those people are bad and wrong, even when their actions are. And that's
The hope.
difficult. The hope is that we're having these conversations.
Yeah.
That there are so many that are now starting to see themselves in this shifting conversation in a way where they identify and go, oh, here's something that resonates. Maybe I want to move towards this.
Yeah.
And so the conversations are happening around, how do we open up these conversations around suicidal thoughts without demonizing that happens, so that we can sit and witness and help someone figure out how to actually live. How do we open up space for these conversations about, where do I find a space that I can show up really authentically? Because
Yeah.
that's not necessarily everywhere, and that's not going to happen overnight. But there are spaces that exist. How can we reach out to our brothers, sisters, as one identifies, and offer a little bit more relational friendship, leadership,
Right.
a kind smile? Can I walk down the street and smile at the person?
So the
who's homeless
simple
there
things,
and
right?
offer them the dignity of, I see you as a human,
Yeah.
even if I'm not able or in a place to do anything, even if they might not want anything done for them. I'm going to smile and send love and witness you as a human. When you're stuck in a traffic jam and you're really frustrated and you get cut off, can you send out some metta to that person and imagine they might be going through something difficult, and just, may you be happy, may you be well, may you be loved. And that shifts the energy from anger and frustration to, I'm going to send you love because I think you need it.
Yeah, and I need it. In that case. Yeah, so the hope is, coming back into the other side of the equation. And how to be with things when, maybe get off balance a little bit. So again, it's all about the balance. Thank you. Thank you for all of this. Thank you for your work. Moral injury, check it out. Check out Abi Dorhosti.
Doroté.
sounds like I'm really practicing her work about this, because it is like, I feel like there will be way more, that's gonna come up in this topic. And so
We're just.
you're
getting started.
you're on, yes, you're on, this is the happening edge. And incredibly important. So, and if you have any questions to us, feel free to email us, d.lucci@sophia.edu, and I can always forward questions to Abby, and we continue this conversation as she continues with her research, and maybe we'll find more solutions and more ways to support people out there. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today. We appreciate you. Somebody is typing, and maybe we wait for that too.
And I'm on not all the platforms. I'm on
There
LinkedIn
you
is
go.
one of the best ways to reach out to me. Please feel free. I'm the only Dorhosti, so I'm easy to find.
Yes, and obviously I have a challenge with that.
Thank you,
friends.
Judy. Appreciate that.
So Judy, Red, thank you both for such a great discussion, such a good topic, and much needed in today's environment. Yes, I really do think it is. So the more you want to join us in these conversations, please. I think, like Abby said, the conversations are key, and thank you, Judy, to pointing to that. It is so important that we continue these conversations, and thank you to you guys here for for your participation. And I'm sure we're gonna get more questions here afterwards. And thank you everybody who is online. So all the very best, and
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Roland, are you good? You're gonna take over from here, and we're gonna sign off.
Yeah, we're all set. And thanks for again, everyone, for coming out this afternoon. And any questions, again, follow up. And we'll be sharing this on our social media channels also, Sophia
Yeah.
University. So please follow us.